Bom dia a todas e todas. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second round of our seminar in the graduate program in International Political Economy of the Federal Reserve of Rio de Janeiro. Let's resume it. Again, we are pleased to receive from Russia Professor Olga Volosyuk of Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs at Higher School of Economics, Professor Dmitry Rozental, Director of Institute of Latin America and Professor at the Department of World Economy at the Higher School of Economics. Now they will discuss Russian and sanctions, impacts and perspectives. After presentations, we will open for audience questions. Welcome, Professor. I appreciate and advise your presentations. Make yourself comfortable. You have 30 minutes for each one. The floor is yours, please, first. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's difficult to put together the word sanction and prospects. But we will try to think about it. So the special military operation of Russia in Ukraine became a breaking point in the foreign policy of Russian Federation. And almost immediately it caused the reaction of the countries that belong to the so-called collective West, the policy of sanctions against the Russian Federation. I'm a historian, and when I began to think about sanctions, I wanted to recall that, to my mind, the first sanctions was the economic blockade of England, which Napoleon proclaimed in 1807. After that time, the policy of pressure on countries with the help of economic and financial measures began widely applied in the 20th and 21st century. Over the 20th century, Western countries have imposed sanctions more than 150 times on various countries of the world. The aims of sanctions were different. So, moderate policy modification, destruction of military potential, regime change or democratization or regime stopping of military operation, and others. It is interesting, I have read some research of Western scholars who studied the sanctions in general, and they write that mostly motives for countries, the reasons for countries to impose sanctions were the demonstration of determination of the policy, of the actions, and that was the most common reason for the sanction, mostly in the United States. Even when the chances of sanctioning being successful are minimal, the American political system forced presidents to dramatize their attitudes towards the actions of other countries. And one way or another, sanctions pressure has long been part of the policy of West, and currently under US sanctions are about 24 countries, and the most famous examples we know that's the example of Cuba from 1960, Iran from 1968, with a small period of dropping sanction. Myanmar, the former Burma, yes, from 1988 also. Belarus from 2004, North Korea from 2006, Syria from 2011. There are different reasons for imposing sanctions and different kind of sanctions and different results of the sanctions, and we will speak about the consequences of the sanctions a little bit later. So as to Russia, in one form or another, sanctions against Russia have been applied by various countries since February 2014, after the beginning of a war in Donbass, and a so-called pro-Russian part of Ukraine. In turn, Russia introduced retaliatory sanctions against the number of countries, such as a ban on the import of products from European Union, the United States, Canada, Norway, and Japan. The sanctions at that time contributed to the fall of Russian currency and the Russian financial crisis of 2014-2016, which was overcame later. Sanctions were also directed against Crimea, which voted to be the part of Russian Federation. A number of goods and technologies of various industries were not available on the peninsula. Tourism and infrastructure services suffered also. On February 21, 2022, immediately after the announcement of Russia's recognition of the independence of Lugansk and Donetsk Democratic Republics, the first sanctions were imposed. On February 24th, the same year, after the start of Russian special military operation in Ukraine, the second stage of sanctions began. By March 7, so say almost in less than 2 weeks, Russia became the world leader in the number of sanctions imposed, surpassing Iran. The word leader is not very appropriate, but that's the result. By March 22nd, the number of Russian individuals and legal entities under sanctions reached 7,116. There were two kinds of sanctions, diplomatic sanctions and economic ones. So as to the diplomatic, on February 24th, Ukraine severed diplomatic relations with Russia, and one more state, the Federate States of Micronesia, did the same the next day. 4 countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the 3 Baltic independent states, which were former also Soviet republics, and New Zealand lowered the level of diplomatic relations with Russia. And also 4 countries, Guatemala, Latvia, Lithuania, and Czech republics, withdrew their ambassadors from Russia. In the period of March-May of 2022, there was a mutual expulsion of diplomats from the countries of European Union and Russia. A number of international organizations have suspended Russia's membership. The Nuclear Energy Agency of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the International Labour Organization, the Human Rights Council, and the Organization of American States. Russia withdrew from the Council of Europe, from the International Trade Union Confederation, and World Tourism Organization, and some others. Among the economic sanctions, there were restrictions of the possibility of entry, residence, and citizenship for citizens of Russia, but not only of Russia and Belarus also. A prohibition of Russian aviation flights and terminations of flights to Russia, ban on Russian and Belarusian media, cultural restrictions, individual sanction against Vladimir Putin, imposition of restrictions at the provincial and municipal levels, refusal of Russian energy resources, freezing and seizure of property of individuals in the Western country, restrictions in the field of science and education, introduction of a price ceiling for Russian oil. But almost at the same time, some countries, some firms, some organizations started the cancellation and lifting of sanctions. For example, starting from March 2022, Norway cancelled the ban of the delivery of goods to the island of Svalbard. There is a Russian base in the Norwegian island. Lithuania for rail transportation to Kaliningrad, which is the separate territory of Russia surrounded by Baltic republics. European Union, the export of wheat and fertilizers, export of oil to third countries. Bulgaria, the work of an oil refinery owned by the Russian company of Lukoil. Luxembourg and Belgium unblocked some frozen accounts. So that was after the rather sharp political statements, the practical economic decision, I would say, but by some parts to not to make the worse the situation of these European companies or countries in some kinds. In response, Russia started retaliatory sanctions. On February 28, in response to the closure of the skies for its aircrafts, the Russian Federal Air Transport Agency introduced symmetrical restrictions for the Western companies. In March, Russia declared the cessation of deliveries of RD-180 rocket engines to the United States and blocked the service for 24 engines remaining in the service for 24 engines remaining in the American use was stopped. The launch of Soyuz 2.1 with 36 British OneWeb communication satellites from Baikonur cosmodromes scheduled for March 5th was cancelled. There was the ban on the export of wheat, oil, rye, barley, and corn to the countries of Eurasian Economic Union. And on March 29, the government of the Russian Federation approved the legalization of so-called parallel imports. On March 31st, the president of Russia signed a decree on gas trade with so-called unfriendly countries. There was a new term in the Russian political sphere, the friendly and unfriendly countries. So the gas trade with unfriendly countries for rubles. According to that decree, gas recipients transfer currency to special settlement accounts opened in Russian bank, Gazprom Bank, and a financial institution converts it into rubles at the Moscow exchange. On April 27, Gazprom stopped the gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria, Finland, Netherlands, and Denmark. And on May 11th, the government of the Russian Federation approved a list of legal entities subject to retaliatory sanctions. The list included 31 companies, most of which belonged to Gazprom Germania Group, so the part of a German company which worked with Gazprom and with Polish company Europol Gas, the owner of the Polish section of the Yamal-Europe gas pipeline. At the same time, Russia started the political line, which was called Turn to the East. I would like to say a few words about this policy because it was the idea, the concept of the necessity of Russia to turn to the East was elaborated for the first time in 2009 in the Russian university, the name of which I hope you know or you will know from today. That's the Higher School of Economics. There was a group of scholars led by the Professor Sergei Karaganov, who was the dean of the faculty and who was also the chairman of the Russian first think tank, which was established in 1993, the Council for Foreign Policy and Defense. So, the idea was that even at that time, in the beginning of 2010s, it became clear that Moscow policy aimed at integrating the Russian Federation as a great power into global American-centric world order that was established after the end of Cold War needed at least a little correction. It was clear for the group, and the idea was that Russia will never become an equal member of the club of the Western countries, and that Russia does not need this club. A turn to the East was primarily towards the neighboring countries of Asia, with which political and economic ties have been developing for many years. At that time, that concept was not accepted by Russian government for practical application. Russian foreign policy was dominated by the idea of Russian integration into the Western community, and the project that was called Great Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok dominated in the minds of Russian officials, Russian politicians. Even in the face of deteriorating relations with the West in 2014, Russia's political elites had difficulty accepting the idea of refusing to cooperate with the countries of Western Union and Western Europe, and United States. Only harsh sanctions and the break of political and economic ties with the Western world forced the political leadership of Russia to accept this concept for practical application and name it as the main concept of Russian foreign politics now. In this situation, the position of many countries, including the largest countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, has become the most important positive for Russian international position. China, India, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, striving to strengthen their sovereignty and increase their role in the world governance, have taken a formally neutral position to the conflict between the West and Russia. In some cases, Iran and China, this position was distinctly and is distinctly pro-Russian or clearly benevolent to Moscow. But in all cases, including the case of Turkey, and Turkey is the member of NATO, it objectively serves Russian interests. I would like to recall also that the USSR at that time had to spend resources and make considerable efforts to keep the countries of Eastern Europe in its orbit. Of the countries of Eastern Europe, only 2 countries, German Democratic Republic and Czechoslovakia, had a developed industrial and technological potential. China, at that time, has been an adversary to the USSR for a quarter of a century. India was just creating the basis of modern heavy industry. Iran was an ally of the United States before the Islamic Revolution, and after the Islamic Revolution, it considered the USSR and the United States both the important elements of the Satanic states. Turkey, Israel, and Saudi Arabia were important elements of the Soviet Union southern containment system. Brazil was an ally of Washington, and South Africa during the apartheid era, a participant in undeclared war with pro-Soviet regimes in the South Africa. The time has changed. As a part of general political course of the turn to the East, Russia began to build relationships, including overcoming the sanctions. On March 31st, 2022, Putin decree was published on the inclusion of a group of countries that imposed sanctions against Russia into the group, as I have told, of unfriendly countries. With the other countries, the task was to strengthen relations and, among other things, learn from experience of bypassing sanctions. The level of sanctions pressure similar to Russia had been experienced before by Iran in 2012 due to disagreements regarding the nature of work on its nuclear program. In addition to the sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council resolution, the European Union, as well as a number of other states, have announced an embargo on the main Iranian export, hydrocarbons. The new sanctions imposed after 2018 had an impact on the work of companies and hit the financial sector of Iran. SWIFT again turned off access to Iranian bank. The Central Bank of Iran fell under sanction. A ban was introduced on gold trading, operation with Iranian currency, and public debt. What lessons Russia had studied from Iranian case? First, what did Iran to bypass the sanction? First, the diversification of partners, the reorientation of trade flows was the increased exposure to individual countries. The share of China as the main buyer of Iranian export increased. At the same time, other countries increased their share, such as Turkey, Pakistan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Second, economic diversification. In the cost of structure of export, the share of extractive industry decreased to 70%, but increased trade in chemical products, plastics, rubber products, and some other. In financial sphere, the important thing was payments in national currencies, pairing of financial messaging systems, and even in May 2022, Iran and Russian Federation have agreed to switch to mutual settlements of national currencies and discussed the connection of their payment system. We have after the 2014 elaborated the Russian payment system, which is called MIR, and set up the Iranian ones. So electronic currencies, Iran has announced its own digital currency, which is used for oil transactions. China, in turn, is developing its own cryptocurrency. Experience of Iran was really actively studied in Russia. Mostly last year, they were meeting, official, unofficial, and this experience hardly contributed to the decision taken in Russia to overcome the sanctions pressure. As to the, say, diversification of partners, Russia was able to reduce the effectiveness of Western sanctions by redirecting oil export flows to China, India, and Turkey. As a result, for example, oil exports from the Russian Federation and India have grown 16 times since the beginning of the special military operation. Russia and India launched the International North-South Transport Corridor. The route was called vital for Moscow as an economic exit in the fight against Western sanctions. But for India, the route is also of strategic importance because it offers access to Central Asia and Afghanistan bypassing Pakistan, which is considered to be, no, I would not say about enemy, say difficult relations with India. According to Indian analyst Vaisali Basu Sharma, who was the former consultant to the Secretariat of the National Security Council of India, the growth in trade between India and Russia and the attention to the International Transport Corridor project show the emerging economies are finally breaking the hegemony of financial structures created by developed countries. Third, some buyers of Russian grains are currently paying in rubles or local currency, and the number of such transactions is growing. The largest importers of Russian grains are Egypt and Turkey. On December 2022, the joint investigation by Reuters and the Royal United Service Institutes, not Russian ones, but Western ones, reported on the global supply chain that Russia has created to meet its needs for Western computer components and other electronics. So semiconductors, chips, and other equipment enter the country through trade hubs in Turkey, Hong Kong, Estonia, from little-known exports, and other countries. On December, Russia had set up a site in the Baltic Sea near the port of Ust-Luga, the new one, to transship fuel, including diesel, from ship to ship. There was also the experience of Iran. On February 1st, 2023, Bloomberg this time stated that the growth of military production helps Russian industry to compensate for most of the damage caused by international sanctions and other consequences of the conflict in the Ukraine. According to the forecast of one expert of Bloomberg Economics, I repeat, and Bloomberg, not Russian, given by that agency, industrial production in Russia will grow by 2% in 2023. Also, in January 2023, the absolute majority of Russian industrial enterprises have replaced the sanctioned equipment, components, and spare parts they needed with those made in China. Also, in March 2023, so almost 2 months ago, Bloomberg again reported that Russia managed to bypass sanction and provide itself with advanced technologies, micro and integrated circuits produced in European Union. In general, according to the publication, Russian imports have returned to the level of 2020. Modern semiconductors are supplied to Russia from third countries, which have dramatically changed the traditional volume of purchases of these goods, significantly increasing them. In some cases, when exports involve high-tech components that can be used in the military industry, the volume of purchases has grown from $0 to millions of dollars. I repeat, that's not the estimations of Russian experts. According to that source, Kazakhstan, Turkey, Serbia, and United Arab Emirates and several other countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia are helping to compensate for the shortage of these products. Say another example, in response to sanctions against its gold mining industry, Russia has found new markets, and the direction of Russian gold supplies was changed from London to United Arab Emirates, Hong Kong, and Turkey. Due to restrictions of the supply of natural gas to Europe, the authority of Russian Federation set the task of tripling the production of liquefied natural gas. In view of the fact that the leading Western equipment manufacturers left the country, Russia began to develop its own technologies for gas liquefaction. As a result, that's also the surprising figures, the European Union spent more than 12 million of euros on Russian liquefied natural gas from January to September 2022, 5 times more than a year before. As to the software is the basis for the functioning of any modern economy. However, by the time when the special military operation was launched, foreign software was mainly used in the Russian market in the key segments of the Russian economy. In June 2022, in accordance with the order of Prime Minister of Russia, the process of priority import substitution of software in key sectors of economy was launched. The goal of the project is to replace 80% of foreign software from leading manufacturers. The consequences of sanctions. All these data, except for the latest on software equipment, I repeat, are not the propaganda of Russian government structures or the Russian media. They are taken from Western sources, which study it very pedantically. How Russia bypassed the sanction, they studied and they published. But that's very interesting, surprising how what the conclusions they made on the consequences, and these conclusions are very contradictory. So there are three types of so-called consequences of the sanctions based on the Western, say, experts. First, sanctions are successful. They led to the collapse of the Russian economy, the deterioration of the life of the population, and a credible increase in unemployment. Now, speaking about the collapse of Russian economy, I would like to repeat Bloomberg concept of the growth of a Russian economy this year in 2%. Second, all these conclusions, I thought about it, why it happened. All these conclusions are made from the comfort of the offices of these experts. For example, the experts from Yale University came to the conclusion that sanctions are causing significant damage to the Russian economy. In Yale, they know better what happened in Russia. A number of statements in Western press that the Russian economy is resilient or even prospering under the sanctions are not true. Almost all supporters of this position, it's interesting, they give the data of March, from March till May 2022, not 23, even not the fall of 23 or 22. Yes, in the first months, starting March, April, and I would say May, there was really difficult situation in Russia when Russian government had to think what to do. There was not, we have discussed before this session, I have told that there was no panic in among the Russian people. Yes, we thought what to do, how to solve the situation. Probably the Russians are accustomed to any kind of difficult life in the Tsarist Russia, in the Soviet times. So we do not panic in any situation. But the situation was difficult. It was very high inflation. The ruble was broken from 70 up to 120 rubles for $1. But then in June, it was 50 rubles for $1. And it stayed for 50 rubles till January of 2023. Now it's more or less balanced. It is 78, 80. So it reached, the situation is now, that was before then special operation, before the February 2022. I did not find any, in these reports, any data for the end of 22 and the beginning of 23, which indicate that the crisis in the country economy has been overcome. Sometimes one even gets the impression that these groups of Western experts is trying to convince themselves. In other words, the indicators are not so bad, but they were bad a year ago, which means that the forecasts at the time were erroneous. The second group has the position that the Russian economy withstood the first onslaught of sanctions, but much more important, that are the deep, medium and long-term consequences of the serious deglobalizations of Russia's economy. It looks like the first group, so now it's not so bad, but it will be the prognosis, the perspective. Yeah, we told the title of our session, Perspectives. So the perspective definitely will be very bad for Russia. And the third, more realistic to my mind, write that sanctions against Russia have not achieved expected effect. I will give only one example. I have erased all the examples, only one. The French Le Monde stated, "We have reached the end of our possibilities." In the opinion of the newspaper, 27 European countries are not going to voluntarily deprive themselves of Russian gas. Of those countries who would like to take such a step, the source of the media, the newspaper, named only Poland and Baltic states. As to the consequences for Europe, they are really very harsh. The sharp rise in energy prices. I have talked with my friends in Spain. They told me that electricity and heating prices have quadrupled. In March 2022, Russia banned the export of birch in response to sanctions, and that was also caused the problem that's not very academic. We are reporting the effect was reported to be the higher prices and lower quality of toilet paper in Europe. Sorry for this example. At the end of November 2022, Bloomberg also reported that imports of liquefied natural gas from Russia increased about 40% in annual terms. This was because buyers were trying to replace dwindling pipeline gas flows. I don't think that the reason, the motive of our meeting is to continue with the consequences that European countries has as a result of sanctions. But it seems to me, if I conclude, that the European Union has castigated itself more than Russia, imposing the sanctions on Russia and doing this sometimes against, I would say, it's obviously against the will of the population of the country, but sometimes against its own political will. Instead of conclusion, the position of the Russian leadership in relation to sanctions. On February 21st, 2023, Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a message to the Federal Assembly, said that Western countries failed to achieve the goals of their sanctions policy. The Russian economy turned out to be stronger. I cite, "The West has deployed not only a military, informational, but also an economic front against us, but nowhere has he achieved anything and now will. The initiators of the sanctions are punishing themselves. They provoked the rise of prices, the closure of enterprises, and energy crisis. And the citizens are told that the Russians are to blame." Prime Minister of Russia, Mikhail Mishustin, said this almost the same thing when he was speaking at the State Parliament on March 23. He said the Russian economy survived in 2022 and returned to a growth trajectory. Now even international organizations predict positive dynamics for it. I remember in 60s there was a very popular American song by the American singer Pete Seeger, which was titled "We Shall Overcome." We shall overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Olga. It was very enlightening presentation. Now I shall give the floor for Professor Dmitry. Make yourself comfortable, please, Professor.
Thank you very much. It's very hard to add something for the brilliant presentation of Professor Volosyuk. I just want to analyze some moments. I think that sanctions are a very strange thing and unstudied thing. And I absolutely agree with what Professor Volosyuk has mentioned, that sanctions have different goals, or it's better say different tasks. And it's very interesting to analyze the sanctions on the example of the main producer of sanctions in the world, the United States. What kind of task it would be? No, for example, the first task in the it's task which usually in the media is a change regime. Or for example, this task was in the sanctions against Venezuela, especially during the period of Donald Trump. And so what? Where is Maduro? I think that this type of sanctions don't work. And there is some reason for this. First of all, because of the sanctions have a very negative effect for population, and the dependence of this population from the government increased dramatically. And the another reason that the sanctions can consolidate the elites around the government. Another type of tasks is very interesting thing. Is task to stop the economic development of another country. Well, for example, we can say about sanctions against China. Yes, we know that China and the United States is very. From the one hand, we see some competition between China and between China and the United States, but from another hand, we see some cooperation of these countries, and the United States try to stop the economic development using the sanctions. It's a very serious thing. Is the last one, I think it's sanctions which has task to show that we are struggle from with our enemies. It's a domestic task. Or, for example, the sanctions against Cuba, the sanctions against Nicaragua don't have the real change regime or to stop the economic development, but these sanctions have task to show to the American people that we are struggle for the democratic values. And now let's speak about Russian situation. I think that it's impossible to change regime now because the Russian Federation has a very deep sources of stability. Speaking about the political regime, it's impossible to split our elites because every considerable political figure under the sanctions. It's impossible to split them. What about the reason to stop the economic development? And I think it's a very serious reason. Yes, I agree with things that Professor Volosyuk mentioned, that the Russian economy demonstrates some, I think, some growth now. But it's a very serious thing. It could affect our development not this year, but the next year or in 2 years. And it's a very great problem. And now in Russia, there are a lot of discussions about the situation. And I took place in some discussions, including in High School of Economics. What we are going to do? We are going to wait for normalization situation, and we're going to cooperate with Western countries, or we are going to change our economic policy and we are going to the gray zone. And we are going to cooperate with countries like Iran. I think the sanctions against Russia is a great present for Iran now, because they increase their market. And as for me, I'm afraid that we are going to go to the gray zone. It's very easy to go to the gray zone, but it's very hard to return to the normal practice of economic development. And the third type, I think the third type is a task to show to the national auditory, to the American auditory, to the European auditory, that we are struggling against Russia, against the Russian economy. And I think that this goal is the main in this situation. But I'd like to say that even countries, all countries, they have their national interests. And I'd like to say about two examples. The first example is Poland. Yes, Russia and Poland have a lot of contradictions, historical contradictions, a lot of conflicts. We have aggressive rhetoric on both sides, in Russian media, in Polish media, but Poland is the third trade partner of Russia in Europe. So what? Another example is Georgia. In 2024, Georgia made statement. We condemn Russia, yeah. We want to join anti-Russian sanctions, but sorry, we can't, because Russia is our main trade partner. I think that now we are in a very difficult situation. I think now we have a very good reception. We can resist. Now we can resist for sanctions, but I think it's very difficult. And we have to do something. We have to invent something for resisting sanctions or avoid these sanctions. The situation is very, very difficult for us. It's very interesting for scientist analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dmitry. It's very interesting. So now I'll give the floor to the audience for questions, please. Por favor.
Hi, again. In the context of sharing maybe the Brazilian perspective and, trying to connect, here in the International Political Economy Post-Graduation Program, we have a professor called Hernani Torres. He developed a concept called the dollar bomb. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it, where he uses, or he says that the dollar is established as a monetary power tool, and especially in the case of sanctions. So he uses other examples, but he recently wrote a paper on the Russian sanctions, or the sanctions against Russia, and using the dollar bomb concept. So I would like to, probably Professor Metri can talk about that better than I can, but I would like to, maybe invite us to think the concept of the dollar bomb as a power tool in the international monetary system. So moving away maybe from actual military conflict and using the dollar as a power tool, maybe that's one of the greatest strengths that the dollar could have in the international monetary system. So I would like to hear your opinions on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think it's very interesting, but I have to repeat what I have said in the last hour session. We don't have any chance for avoid sanctions as dollarization. Dollarization is a very good thing. It's very interesting and it's a very powerful thing, because the dollar is an instrument for sanctions. It's a very good instrument of currency. But now, in the situation of the current situation of world economy, it's impossible to speak about the dollarization. What is alternative for dollar? Yuan, for example, but yuan is 6% of international currency, reserve currency. Some other currency of BRICS, we don't have its currency. And in this situation, we have to exist in this situation. We have to use the existing instrument for avoiding sanctions. how to do it in this situation, I don't know, but the dollarization is not the way now. Maybe in 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, its instrument will be work. But now, well, I'm afraid that it's very early to think about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our comments reminds me of good policemen and bad policemen. So I think I would say the next, that we are in the situation now which is difficult to predict. Because some years ago, you would never ask this question, really. But the situation is changing. And I hope very much that it would be changing in the few years. But I think nobody, even I'm not economist, I told you, I'm historian. But I think even economists, even those who specialize in financial sphere, cannot predict now what would happen, because it depends on the military situation, it depends on the political situation all over the world in the different countries, how they react, how they respond, how they see themselves in this world now, today, not yesterday, but now, today, in the situation, and the economic situation. But what is important that the power of Western world was based on dollar and was based on cheap Russian gas also. So there is no now cheap Russian gas. Let's see what will happen with dollar.
Hello, good morning. First of all, my name is Danilo. I'm a PhD candidate for economics here in UFRJ. So my thesis is about the evolution of the Russian economy since the 90s and the sanctions and so on. So I would like to ask you first, because with the sanctions we see the two movements of Russia. First of all, what some authors call Russification. So it's a kind of import substitution policy, and they're looking for the East. So is that fair to say that before the 2014 sanctions, Russia was already moving towards the East and was already looking for import substitution? If I'm not wrong, there is a formal official policy of Russia of 2013 that it was already trying to do these movements. And a second question, really quickly, I would like to know how developed is the semiconductor sector in Russia, because there is a lot of discussion about this sector and China and the US, but nobody says anything about the development of this sector in the Russian industry. So,
Semiconductors.
Yeah, semiconductors, yeah. Thank you.
Well, it's a very difficult question, but okay, first of all, speaking about the Russian economy, our turn to the East is a very complicated thing. What is East, first of all?
I would say South Korea, China, India.
Yeah, South Korea, India. Let's speak about another term. Let's speak about this as a global South. And so we see our trade with all countries, all Latin American countries, about $15–16 billion. It's a very low number. Our trade with Africa, all African countries, just the same. And what we are going to do? Yes, we speak a lot about the turn to the East. We have another term, very popular. It's very popular. The international majority. But in fact, our traditional trade partners, still European partners. China is a very important country, but as I said, we have a lot of contradictions with China. We have a lot of very strong competition, and now China has much better instrument, a lot of instruments for struggle in this competition and to win in this competition. So I think that it's very early to analyze the situation. Now, the concept of turn to the east is still an idea. Yes, we do some things to implement its idea, but now it's very early to say. It's very hard to turn all Russian economic flows from West countries to the East countries. It's impossible. Frankly speaking, for me, it's very hard to answer to a second question because I'm not economist. I'm politician, politologist, and here I can't explain this. But I can help you if you want to stay your contact. I can help you after this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we are to analyze the Russian economy and the actual situation within the topic of sanctions. And I would not say that this turn to the East is only theoretical now. Yes, some years ago I told the history of the concept. It was the turn to Asia, East Asia, absolutely clear. And now the concept is not so, I would say, Asian. It's really the concept of the turn to the so-called friendly countries to Russia and try to find the opportunities and advantages of cooperation with the countries that Russia had not had its economic relations so active, so profound. The main reason, as I have told, and I would repeat it, that Russian political elites were very pro-Western, including the properties that they had, still some of them have in Europe, not all, but some of them. But the idea was the European civilization, we are Europeans, we are the same, whatever, in civilizational, in political and economic point of view. So what do they think now? That the contradictions, that confrontation of Russia with the West will long for a long time, that it will not be stopped even if the military operation of Russia will finish rather soon. I spoke with them saying that we have to continue our cultural contacts, our educational contacts with people. We have to divide, to separate the politicians, political elites and people, and we have very good contacts. We have a lot of students from European countries. Our students go to Europe to study, as one example. But it's interesting, all of them who are responsible for the political concepts, the diplomats, the parliamentaries, the members of the government, they have very clear idea, at least now. Now the page of our relations with the West is closed. Closed, no. Not probably or maybe or some when we don't know, closed. The second question, and Professor Rozental had told about it, we have turned to the East. But if the East had turned to Russia, what do we see now? The back of the East or what? And this situation is very difficult to describe, analyze in few words. First, there are different countries and different relations now. There are different sectors in different countries with whom we don't only want, but we are starting negotiate, trade, collaborate, whatever, buy. And there is a big part now, as I understand, of gray zone that we don't even know. For example, India that also said that it does not approve the military operation, suddenly had increased, as I have told, its oil export from nobody knows where to millions and millions of dollars. Suddenly Iran has changed. Suddenly we are not the specialists in these trade flows, but suddenly we read, oh, okay, we have, for example. It's a situation not academical, but one of my friends, she worked with the firm, with the company of Finland, which bought kitchens to Russia. So on the 24th of February, the same day, she called to her partners and they told, we will not work with you anymore. You are imposed by sanctions. No, there will be no more collaboration. 2 or 3 months had passed and she told me that one Italian company, also building and selling kitchens, went to Moscow asking who is interested in. So she was not represented in Russian market before, but it used the situation to come to the market. Another situation that after the sanctions of 2014, when it was sanctions on agricultural situation and counter-section and so on, the agricultural sector in Russia have increased. And we have substituted really, and there was a panic among the intellectual elites. How would we live without, say, a Spanish jamón serrano or, I don't know, Italian cheese or whatever. But yeah, they have substituted. I bought Spanish chorizo made in the surroundings of Moscow, and I tell you, very good, without chemicals. Really, without chemicals, very good taste and very good quality. The cheese we have a lot of now. That's one of examples. So the way is long, the way is difficult, but we think that it would be the way. So about semiconductors, yes, it's difficult for me to answer also because, not only because I'm not a specialist or economist, but I think this part of, we know what is open to public, only this. So, but we hope. Just
30 seconds. I think that all depends the size, the company which is our partner. We are speaking about some small companies here. They are going to avoid some sanctions, and they are looking for some ways to cooperate with Russian countries. But when we speak about some huge companies, I don't know, like Embraer, they are not going to cooperate, taking into account the secondary sanctions. Just the same I can say about some Chinese companies, even about Chinese companies which are under sanctions. For example, Huawei. Huawei has chance to return to the American market, and that's why he's not going to cooperate with Russia, and they stop the operation in our countries. That's all.
Another example, Spanish Inditex, very big one, yeah, it voted for the sanctions, everything, and then it brought the part of the business to the, I don't remember, Turkish or Iranian or Saudi Arabian or Emirates company, and it returned, all Zara stores have returned to Russian in April, 23rd of April was the opening, but the other names, Maas, Maan, I don't remember, but yeah. But the same product and the same styles and everything, and yes, and the Iranian case, they opened very small companies, no-name companies, and they worked in the market. Probably that's also the way we don't know the names of these companies that are now in China, in India, and Iran that they cooperate.
Well, any further questions? Okay.
Thank you. I would like to know about, here in Brazil, we have a strong debate about something like a lack of interest about this global south in sanctioned Russia, and besides the condemned of invasion of Ukraine. But I would like to know if Russia seeking about a more strong approach with this global south could be an answer for avoid sanctions, strong sanctions by the Western countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I think, as my personal point of view, that Russia is speaking about the global south not because of Russia is going to avoid sanctions with the help of these countries, but the situation is very difficult for us. We are isolated from our traditional partners. I mean the Western countries, I mean the United States, the countries of Europe, and we can't get some technologies from these countries where they push out us from the markets. And in this situation, we have to look for the alternative partners. For example, Latin America. First of all, we have to speak about Brazil, Africa, some other regions. The problem is that we lose a lot of opportunities in our past to normalize our relations with our partners in Latin America and Africa and some other regions. And now we are going to do all our best to improve the situation. We are going to cooperate. We are going to organize some technological cooperation. But in this situation, we just in the beginning of the great way, a very long way. And I hope that in the middle of this way, we can find the solution and find the solution of our problems. Thank you.
I only wanted to add that I think in the 90s, Russia was in very profound crisis, economical, a lot of political crisis. So starting from the beginning of the 2000s, we are, if it is possible to say, rising from the knees and making more stable state in the economical and the political way. So the time has come to make the foreign relations more variative, to diversificate, if I can. The military operation, the sanction, all this situation, it fostered the track, the tendency, the desire. It was absolutely impossible to continue, even at the beginning of 21st century, to continue the level of the relations with the countries of the world which we had during the Soviet time. The Russia had no economy, had no political force. It had political will, but had no force. Year by year, we are trying to improve it, and it is the time now, I think, to reopen the situation, the relations that we had before, and to use. And as I told it, the sanctions and all these, which is among the military situation, the Ukrainian conflict, they only pushed, the sanctions pushed out Russia from the West, but the situation pushed Russia into the hands of you have called Global South. There are a lot of terms we can use, yes, world majority, Global South, whatever, but the idea is very clear, it seems to me.
Okay, mais? Anyone more? Okay, the last one, okay?
Hello, good morning. I would like to know what Russia thinks about the next United States elections, because I think Trump is gaining a lot of popularity. He's a strong character, and talk about a little bit of the military operation and how Russia would deal with a situation where the United States, tries to have a firm hand, try to push something a bit harsher onto Russia.
Thank you for the question. It's a very difficult question, and what I try to answer. First of all, I think that we had some hopes related to Trump during his first term. And what? During the first term, Trump tried to press on Russia and implement a lot of economic sanctions. Yes, there are some kind of types of, or some people in Russia who have hopes for Trump, and he will, if he can beat Biden, Trump maybe can turn the United States policy. But in my point of view, we have a very strong anti-Russian coalition in Congress. I mean, in the Democratic Party and Republican Party. So I don't think that the possible return of Trump can change something. I don't think so. Now we are in very difficult, very dangerous situation because Russia, Ukraine, United States, European Union, they don't know how to stop the conflict. They don't know, we don't have, I mean Russia and all sides of conflicts, we don't have the picture of the possible victory. We don't know how is it. And because of lack of this picture of victory, because of lack of mechanism, some mechanisms that can stop the conflict, now we are in a very dangerous and very serious situation. Sorry for lack of optimism.
I would like to add only that the election of Trump in 2016 was extremely unexpected. I know one Russian expert who voted for the victory of Hillary Clinton. He was so sure. He participated in the TV, in all media, saying, no, that's nothing to write about. It is absolutely clear. So he wanted to suicide himself after the election of Trump. No, it's a joke, but he was in very difficult situation. First. Second, historically, Russia usually had better relations with the Republican Party and with the presidents from the Republican parties. It could be surprising, but it was Richard Nixon, for example, all the treaties that were signed by Soviet Union with Nixon and whatever. Third, yes, there were really expectations when the Trump won the victory, compared all over the world when there was a great pessimism, I know, about the Trump victory. Even the Russian parliament, they opened the bottle of champagne thinking that, oh, now we will. And as Professor Rozental told, nothing very specific happened with, no, we will not analyze now why. Was it the pressure on the president by his surroundings, by any other forces that take the decisions? But there were not big changes in the real relations of Russia and United States. As to the current situation, we have the political estimation, official estimation of Russian politics, of our estimation, that it could not be worse than now, and it is clear it's difficult to say something else. So it's difficult to predict also. I would say very diplomatic. We will continue, or we will develop the relations with any president that will be elected in the United States. But also it could be any unexpected situation. There are other candidates that appear now from the Republicans and so on. Let's see, let's wait. And yes, Russia will be developing the relations with any candidate, with any president.
I just want to defend that expert who support Hillary. We have to remember that Hillary got more votes than Trump, and the difference was about 3 million voters. But the American election system is a very, very strange thing. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's finish, but I'd like to thank Professor Olga, Professor Dmitry so much for their presentations, and also everyone who came here to attend the event. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and if I allowed to add, yeah, we're very impressed by your interest. And we told during the first session that we would like to know the opinion of Brazilian scholars, not only questions. So I think I know how we can get it. We invite you to Russia with the speeches or lectures, whatever, and then we will have the chance to know the opinion of Brazilian scholars. Thank you very much.